So today, we are halfway through our 8-week series that I've been calling At the Core of Joy, where we are looking at the 8 core values of Community of Joy. Isn't that name clever, At the Core of Joy? Thank you for laughing, Stacy. A core value, if you don't know or haven't heard, is a guiding principle that dictates our behavior. It guides who we are, who we want to be. It's not just words on a page. It's not words on the announcement sheet. It's not words on our website. It's not words on our wall. It's not just words, but it's words that guide who we are and who we want to be as a people, as a congregation. Because you know what? You can say a whole lot of things, but if you don't live what you're saying, the way you live is what people are going to believe, not what you're saying. And so if we want to be a church that follows Jesus in the way of Jesus, it's good for us to have some core values. And so here at Community of Joy, a number of years ago, a long time ago actually, I went to work and set out 8 core values for us. We've been working our way through them. We're halfway through. That means we are at number 4 and we have 4 more. Now, the 8 core values can come in any order except the first one. The first one always has to be the first one because all of the other core values, all of who we are as a congregation, as people who follow Jesus, flow out of the first value. Do you know what the first value is? Always Jesus. And then, indeed, if we don't start with Jesus, who are we and what are we? Our first core value is always Jesus, because all that we do and all that we are and all that we're about as a congregation should be always about Jesus. Not about Pastor Martin, not about you, but about Jesus. And so, if you missed any of these sermons, they're all online now. And Tracy did a marvelous job of getting the slides to sync with when they change, and just delighted to have them online. So then that was the first week. Then the second week, we talked about open arms, and we believe that Jesus has open arms. And we looked at the parable of the prodigal son, the loving father, the disgruntled brother, however you want to frame that, the running father. Is how I like to look at it. But anyhow, that parable talks about God, the Father, standing looking for his son to come back, and had open arms when he did. And so we believe that Jesus has open arms, God has open arms, and so should his people have open arms. And the third core value is serving hands. And we talked about that last week. And we said, this is us. It's who we are. Our hands should be engaged in serving others. All of our core values, you'll notice, except for today's, are 2 words. And there's a reason for that, because I want our values to be memorable. I want you to know what they are. If we wrote a paragraph or even a sentence about each core value, could you remember a sentence? No. Could you remember a paragraph? No. But you can remember 2 words. It's 17 words that you can remember. Always Jesus, open arms, serving hands. And today is the only one that has 3 words, because I didn't know how to do it in 2. Among the broken. It didn't sound good to say among broken. Among the broken. That's our core value for today. Now, I struggled with what to call this core value. What to call the people who we are called to be among. Some churches talk about being among the needy or being among the poor. But I really feel like that doesn't get it. Well, to be among God's people, some people can hear that as saying there's certain people you're to be among, and there's certain people who aren't a part of God's people. And so, it was really a dicey situation. And so I landed on the broken. And I landed on the broken because if you read the Gospels, if you look at Jesus and his life, if you look at who he spent his time with, if you look at who he sent his disciples to spend time with, if you look at any of that, you'll see that Jesus spent lots of time and sent his people, his followers, his disciples to be with people who weren't like him. Now, it's a natural human thing to gather with people that look like you and act like you and think like you, isn't it? But that's not who Jesus spent his time with, and that's not who he sent his disciples or followers to spend their time with. He spent his time with people that were nothing like him. In fact, the people that looked at faith in a way that might be similar to him, the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, he couldn't stand them. And he didn't spend a lot of time with them. He spent a lot of time with people who were on the edges, people who were marginalized by the church. Not much is different today. Marginalized by the society. And what I mean by marginalized by the church and by the society, the church in that day and now has this unbelievable tact of putting people down, of pushing people aside, of pointing fingers. Forgetting that when you point fingers at someone else, 3 of them are pointing back at you. We're going to talk about that next week in the whole core value of beloved mess. But, Jesus spent his time with people who were marginalized by the church, by the society, people who were put down, pushed away, and pointed out. Outcasts, sinners, poor, needy, people who were in need of mercy. That's who the broken are. People who are in need of mercy. That's who we are. That's who I am. That's who you are. We all need mercy. All of our lives have brokenness in them. And Jesus came to spend time with us and to send those who followed him out to be with people just like us, but not so that we would gather around in a holy huddle, but so that we would go out to the places where the marginalized, the people who've been put down, pushed away, pointed at, are hanging, and spend time with them. Because the church is not a country club for the privileged. The church is not a gathering of the saints. It's not. If that's why you're here, there's the door. Serious. It's just not who we are. Nice try, Rob. It's not who you are, brother. And nothing makes me happier here at Community of Joy than when our homeless brothers and sisters who we've had relationship with over the years come in and feel comfortable to join us here in worship and in activities. And we didn't see it as much this year as we normally do when we host the shelter here in our facility. And it's not because when we do that and we see them joining us in worship, it's not because they need a warm place to go, because many don't stay, but it's because they feel welcome, they feel valued, they feel accepted, they feel loved. And that's as it should be. Next week, when you walk in here, the sign's going to say, "No perfect people allowed." And that's as it should be. But the church often has a way of thinking that it's only for perfect people. And so we put down and push aside and point out those who aren't, when in reality, it's all of us. In Matthew 9, one of the passages that Pastor Sharon read this morning, the first one that she read, we find Jesus, and it's an interesting exchange that's taking place. Jesus is gathering up 12 followers, people that are going to follow him and learn from him, that he's going to mentor, that he's going to leave his ministry with. And this Matthew 9 tells us about one of them. He goes and encounters Matthew, who wrote this gospel, who at that time was a tax collector, a beloved tax collector. No, he was a hated tax collector. And not much has changed. I mean, who likes the tax collectors? Nobody. It's a little different in that day because Matthew had the ability from the state to collect taxes from Mary Lou. And Mary Lou owed $100, but Matthew could say, "You know what, Mary Lou, I want $200 from you." And he was well within his right to do that. And so when Mary Lou knows that she only owes 100, but Matthew's pulling at her and telling her, and she's obligated to pay whatever the tax collector said. If she knows she only owes 100 and he's wanting 200, you don't like Matthew very well, do you? And I shouldn't have picked on you because your son's Matthew. I'm sorry. I just picked, I know you love Matthew. That's why you're sitting next to Matt. But you see what it is, what's going on here. And Jesus says to Matthew, the tax collector, the hated tax collector, the scum of the earth, Jesus says, hey, I want you to come follow me. I want to mentor you. I want to teach you. I want you to be my disciple. I'm going to do great things in you and through you. To the tax collector. And then get this, the picture just even gets more interesting, and I love the way Matthew paints it. And Matthew paints it because it was Matthew. And so Jesus calls him to follow him, and then Matthew invites Jesus to his house. And not only does Matthew invite Jesus to his house, he doesn't invite the upstanding citizens of the community to the house. He invites his friends, the sinners and other tax collectors. Actually, it's quite comical as how Matthew describes it. Matthew says, at his home, he invited dinner guests along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. Disreputable sinners. We're not talking about the upstanding people of the day. We're talking about the scum of the earth. And then he even says that. Actually, he doesn't say that. The Pharisees, the religious leaders, the ones who weren't invited to the dinner party, who see who Jesus is hanging with, who were in charge of all the laws, and they see that the disreputable sinners are gathering in the house with Jesus, they say to his followers, why does your teacher eat with such scum? Scum! Not the people that mom and dad sent you to be with or want you to be with. The people on the other side of the tracks, the scum of the earth. Jesus is hanging with them. He's breaking bread with them. He's eating with them. It's scandalous, I tell you. And then the Pharisees, Matthew says, the Pharisees. They say that to his followers, and when Jesus heard what they had asked, Jesus says to them, healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. And then he added this, and this is Jesus taking the sword and saying, touché. Because these are the religious leaders. These are the people who know the law, who know the scriptures, backwards and frontwards. They know them. But there's a difference in knowing them here and knowing them here in a way that flows out of our lives. And so Jesus says this. He says, now go and learn the meaning of this scripture. This is touché. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. These are the people that have a whole system of religion built on sacrifices. You sacrifice this thing for that sin and that thing for this sin, and their whole system is built on that. And Jesus is saying, no, it's not about that. I want you to learn to show mercy. And then he goes on, he says, for I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. I mean, he's putting that dude in his place. That Pharisee, I bet, wanted to crawl under a table. Because here's Jesus hanging with the broken, the outcasts, the scum, as the Pharisee said. You see, brothers and sisters, at the core of joy are a people who are often found among the broken, not huddling together, not holding themselves above others in the community or in the country, not thinking that they are special and better than other people. But at the core of joy are people who are found among the broken, who are found out in community gardens in our community. In Luke 10, it's a passage of Scripture that Pastor Sharon didn't read. I always wrestle with how many passages of Scripture we can stand up and read. And this is one that didn't make the cut for that, but I do want to talk about it because it's a marvelous interchange between Jesus and a religious law expert. One of those Pharisees. The Pharisee, or the religious law expert, as Luke tells us, comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And here's the touche. Jesus says, "What does the law of Moses say?" So he's asking a religious leader, a religious a Pharisee, he's asking that person what he must do, or that person's asking Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus is saying, "Well, what does the law say? What does Moses say?" He's turning it back on him. "You should know, you're an expert." And then he says, "And how do you read it?" So the religious leader says, he says, "I got this. I know what the law of Moses says. I read it all the time. I talk about it all the time. I know what it says. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said, "Right. Do this, and you'll live." Well, there's the touche. I gotcha. Because they don't talk about doing it. They just talk about it. And so then the religious leader wants to find his way out. And so he says, "Okay, so who's my neighbor? I got you here, Jesus. Come on. Who's my neighbor?" And Jesus does this masterful job, as Jesus often does. He tells a story. It's a story we call the parable of the Good Samaritan. And it's a beautiful story, and it's another touche that Jesus does to these religious leaders. Jesus is telling this story about a Jew who's traveling, and he gets beat up and left for dead alongside the road. And so who encounters him first? A religious leader. And he walks by him on the other side. Well, why does he walk by him on the other side? Because he's honoring the law. The law says that if your shadow falls over a dead body, you're impure, unclean. And you have certain rituals that you have to go through to become clean again. It takes time. And so it's a whole lot easier to walk by and not let your shadow cast on that dead body, that supposed dead body. And so the second guy does the very same thing. He walks by on the other side. Both religious leaders. The villain of the story, the hero of the story, is a Samaritan, a half-breed, somebody who the Jews hated desperately, vehemently. And Jesus tells this story and makes the person who is hated the most be the hero. He comes along and he sees this Jew, somebody who probably spit on him as a Samaritan, who probably ignored him and probably didn't recognize his personhood as a Samaritan and a Jew. He sees this Jew laying there hurt, and he has compassion for him, and he binds him up and takes care of his wounds, and he takes him to a hotel, and he checks him in and pays for the bill and said, "Here, if he needs more than this, keep him here till he's well. If he needs more than this, I'll be back next time I'm through town and I'll pay you more." And then Jesus turns to the religious leader and says, "Who was the neighbor?" And the religious leader gets it right. He says, "The one who showed mercy." But man, that had to hurt for him to say that. Because he was a Jew. Because he was a religious leader. He knew the law. And the law said you got to walk by because your shadow can't cast over a corpse or you're unclean. And here Jesus is saying to us that the people that we're to be among are those who need mercy. Those who need mercy. They're our neighbors. They're the broken. And I don't know about you, but I'm one of the first ones. I need mercy. I need it new every day. So we're to be among ourselves. But not just people that look like us and act like us and think like us. We're to be among the people who are hurting, who are struggling, who haven't found their way to Jesus. At the core of joy are people who are among the broken. because they are always Jesus with open arms and serving hands. At the core of joy are people who join with other denominations and other churches and multi-state-wide effort to go door to door in neighborhoods that many of us have never been in and have never seen, didn't even know existed, and knock on doors and offer a box of blessing and an opportunity to pray for the people in that house. That's what's going on the screen. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Because you see, our love and our compassion for people is in direct relationship with our love and compassion for God. When we are found among the broken, we are demonstrating our love for God. It's plain and simple, brothers and sisters. Because we are always Jesus, we will be found among the broken. And sometimes the broken are children in neighborhoods around our community garden that don't have school supplies and backpacks as readily as other children. Mother Teresa once was asked, "How did you receive your call to serve the poor?" And she answered, "My call is not to serve the poor. My call is to follow Jesus, and I follow Jesus to the poor." You see, brothers and sisters, when we follow Jesus and are found among the broken, we will be among those who have been put down, pushed aside, pointed at. We will serve the Jesus in them, and we will recognize their worth and value as persons. Last week, we looked at Matthew 25, and you heard Pastor Sharon read it again, and maybe if you were here last week, you wondered, well, what in the world's that? I heard that last week. Well, here's the deal. I want to look at it again this week because I want us to look at the places where Jesus said he was served. Because it's places of brokenness in our world. And an interesting thing is, if you look at that, Jesus is telling this story. It's a story that he made up. He's telling it to make a point. It's a point about judgment, but we're not talking about judgment. We talked about that last week. We're not talking about that today. But the other point that he wants to make is that if you look at it, both groups of people that he separated at this moment of judgment didn't recognize that they had served him or hadn't served him. And he says, and they say to him, in the ones, the good ones say, they ask, "When did we ever see you in all these situations?" And Jesus says, "I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." And so what were those situations? There was a person that was hungry and you gave him food, person who was thirsty and you gave him drink, person who was sick and you visited him, person who was in prison and you visited him, a stranger and you welcomed them in. All these people that are on the margins, on the fringes, all these broken situations, when you minister to them, Jesus says, you're ministering to me. When you find yourself among the broken, there I am. That's what he's saying in that. We recognize the personhood and value of others, especially the poor, the outcast, and those in need of mercy, the broken. And when we do, we recognize the Jesus in them. I heard a long time ago, and it's stuck with me. It's been almost 30 years since I heard this pastor say this. Bill Hybels once said, "There aren't a set of eyes that you will ever look into that God doesn't love as much as he loves you." Think about that. We're all created in the image of God. We're all beloved by God. We're going to talk about that next week because our core value next week is beloved mess. At the core of joy are people who are always Jesus, open arms, serving hands, and among the who? The broken. That's why, brothers and sisters, we spend time at Pinehurst Elementary School. That's why in one day's time we took up an offering to put T-shirts on the Pinehurst Choir. And if you notice on the back bulletin board, you'll see the notes that the third graders gave us that Tuesday night when we were there for the spaghetti dinner, when they honored us for our 10 years of working at Pinehurst Elementary School. We're not done. We're going to continue another 10 years and another 10 years. And as long as you all want to do that, long after I'm here, I'm hoping you're still engaged at Pinehurst Elementary School. And I'm not going anywhere, but I am going to die one day. And, when that happens, I won't be here. And I hope that our children and children's children will be engaged in Pinehurst Elementary School. I hope that never stops. I hear people in the community saying, wouldn't it be nice if all schools had a community? I heard that this week from someone in the community who I don't know. Wouldn't it be nice if all schools had a community of joy in their corner? That's exactly what was said. Well, anyhow, some of the third graders, 2 of those notes back there on the bulletin board are Valentine's, and 2 of them say thank you for the choir shirts that you all bought. They remembered from December till now. It's amazing. That's why we work there. To bring blessing and to be among the broken. And I'm telling you, our schools, our teachers, our staff, they need lots of help and encouragement these days. In light of Florida, it's a scary place to work. They need us to show up and undergird them in prayer and to love them, to encourage them and to say thank you. It's one of the reasons why we work at the community gardens to be among the broken and the people that we meet in the community gardens. It's one of the reasons why we host the homeless shelter here in our community, in our building. It's when in 2007, when we bought this building, we had these chairs, and we could have gotten rid of these chairs because this space had pews. And there were some among us. I had one lady say to me, "Why did you ruin such a beautiful space by taking out the pews and all the decorations and things?" Yeah, she's not here among us anymore, but she did say it. And it was a beautiful place, but it's much more beautiful now. And it serves our purposes. And we're able to host homeless shelters here in our sanctuary, at least until it got too big. We got rid of the pews because we had the chairs, and I wanted us to be able to host the homeless shelter with 14, 15 other churches in our community. Because we need to be among the broken. Because we're broken. It's one of the reasons why we do Be a Blessing Sundays. Be a Blessing Sundays are every time there's a 5th Sunday in the month, we cancel services. We gather at 9 o'clock. We have projects inside and outside where we go into the community. The projects that are inside go out into the community later to be a blessing to somebody. One of the reasons why I want us to go out in the community and do the things we do, even if it's just picking up trash. I want us to see our community through different eyes than what we normally do when we're riding in our 5-wheeled boxes. The steering wheel and the 4 underneath. When we ride in those things, you miss half the stuff that's in our neighborhoods. When you walk down the sidewalk, when you walk in the street and pick up a piece of trash, you see a whole different perspective. Our eyes are open because we need to be among the broken. That's why we do Be a Blessing Sundays here. Also to connect with each other in deeper ways. That's why we participate in a denomination that's global, that does all kinds of things around the world on our behalf. And we're highlighting those this year. We haven't been doing a very good job of that. One of the reasons why we're sending money to the Global Food Initiative, if you weren't here that Sunday when I talked about the bumper stickers that are back there in the back, put them on a jar and put it somewhere where you can throw some money in there. I've been doing that regularly. It's not a lot, but I've been throwing in my pocket change. That's how I've been deciding to do it. And that's going to go to the Global Food Initiative. That's helped us with a community garden that works at food issues around the world. One of our charter members, the Rep Locals, who have moved away about 5-6 years ago, sent me a check this week. They listened to the State of the Church address, heard that being promoted, sent a $100 check and said, "We want to be in on the Global Food Initiative. We want to be a part of that." And it's just so cool. And it's why I am working on our behalf with Walter Davidson. Walter Davidson, please stand up. I didn't know. This is a God thing. So this is Walter Davidson, okay? He's a troublemaker. Steer clear. He didn't know. I didn't know that Walter was coming when I had planned to do this morning. But it's one of the reasons why I'm working hard with Walter and his congregation, Beacon of Light, which meets right next door. Because when we first used this place as a permanent shelter, as a homeless shelter, we don't have a kitchen. We don't have a fellowship hall. So we had to go next door to partner with Bethany Lutheran and use their kitchen and fellowship hall. And it wasn't too long into that relationship that Beacon of Light came on board. And they joined us and helped us in our 2 weeks. And then the Restoration Project came, and that's how the Corner Church Collective came to be. And then in the last several years, we've had congregational liaisons, a person in charge of, in each congregation who's in charge of their congregation's response to our 2 weeks of the community shelter. And Walter has been that for a number of years at Beacon of Light, working with me in that effort. And this year, we had the beautiful experience of needing to go somewhere else because our facility was too small, which it has been for the last several years, but we were going to host them here until we realized that we had double what we could hold in here. And so we rented this warehouse, and it proved to be such a beautiful experience and beautiful location for this ministry that Walter said to me, why don't we buy this thing and turn it into a full-time, year-round shelter for homeless men in our community? Now, you might ask, why men? The women and children are cared for. The shelters that we have, 2 shelters that work in our community and that host people who have need in our community, and the women and children are cared for. But the men, there are more homeless men than either shelter can accommodate, and there's a need for a shelter to open up to take care of the men that can't be accommodated in the other 2 shelters. So we are going to buy this property. That's our hope. That's our dream. That's our prayer, that God will provide what's needed. And where Beacon comes in is Beacon has a fund that they have $150,000 in. This property has 2 warehouses. You see one in the back. And the back one is the piece of the property that Beacon would like to use as a place to meet, a worship space. And they're willing to contribute their $150,000 toward the $299,000 price of the purchase of this property. We're going to have to raise. Walter's going to have to raise. God's already doing it, brother. Because you called me this week and said you had a customer at Pohanka that gave you a check, and I came last night here to get my power cord for my laptop, which I left here, the church's laptop, because I needed it. I use a personal laptop during the week. But in the mailbox was a note that says, "Dear Pastor Hutchison, I read about your emergency shelter project in the Independent." If you didn't read the article that was published in the Independent, the editor of the Independent came to me and said, "That Facebook post you made, I want you to make it an article." And so out of that, this lady wrote, "I read your article in the Independent. My heart goes out to the homeless, and particularly the 21-year-old. Thank you for helping them. Best wishes, Jenny Wise." And she had a $100 check written out to me, which I endorsed over and gave to Jean because it shouldn't have been written out to me. And that's the first $100 in our part of the warehouse purchase fund. So God's already working, and God has worked in a variety of ways. Let me just tell you some more about this. Walter and I believe with all our beings that the homeless situation can be solved with a lot of grace, a lot of love, and a permanent location. We can greatly diminish the number of homeless brothers that we have in our society. The mayor's already working at that. I don't know if you saw the Daily Times article this week or saw the piece I posted on Facebook, but they've taken 22 chronically homeless individuals off the streets of Salisbury, given them a place to live, helped them pay their rent, and are working at case managing, giving them case management for the issues that they have that they need to have somebody walk alongside with them. And 20 of those 22 are still in the program and making strides. Now, there's a population that will not meet their criteria, and that's who we need a shelter for. We need a shelter for folks who, in the cold weather months, that can be sheltered in regardless of whether they're willing to address issues that they have in their life and consider breaking free or not. They just need shelter. And we need to shelter them longer than the churches are currently sheltering, because here's the deal. We do January through March, but it's cold in December. It's cold in November. It's cold the end of October. The reason the churches don't do earlier is there's this thing called Christmas. I'm telling you the truth. They don't want them in their facilities during Christmas. Now, to my knowledge, Community of Joy is the only church, and I said it on your behalf, and I knew you'd back me, and I didn't think you'd fire me for this, saying this, but I said if other churches will step up, we'll host it every couple of years. We can't do it every year, but we'll host it every couple of years at Christmas time. We'll make that kind of sacrifice because it's always Jesus. And isn't Christmas about Jesus? Well, it's not in the way we celebrate it in our culture. You get me? And so we are exploring how to bring this into reality. And I believe, and Walter believes, that God is orchestrating all the steps to have that happen. I see where our involvement here in this neighborhood, at Pinehurst, at the community garden, has made connections for us. God has used that as a platform to make connections to make this happen. I believe that with all my being. You remember 5-6 years ago when this crazy pastor was talking about a community garden? And look at it now. Mark it down. This crazy pastor is talking about buying a warehouse or fanning the flame of Walter's congregation to buy a warehouse. And mark it down. God's going to do it because there's just too much that's lining up. There's 15, 16 churches that are part of this community cold weather emergency shelter project, CESP. And we emailed them before we decided to take a next step. We emailed them and said, would you join us in this effort? And the consensus is that, well, when we began, the model we used was great to use empty spaces to house the homeless in the winter. It's no longer serving our purposes. It's larger. It's too large for a lot of churches. And it doesn't cover the whole cold weather months. The only detraction that anybody listed, and it's a detraction that we experience, is that if you don't serve in the shelter at all, you don't come face to face with the issue of homelessness. It's easy to be a church person who doesn't see the issue of and the face of homelessness because you're not involved in it. And that's greater if that happens off-site than if it happens on-site. And then, it's just amazing the way God works. That article that I turned into, the Facebook post I turned into an article. I got an email on Friday from a gentleman who, not the landscaper that hired 2 of our guys out of the shelter when we were running it, but a different landscaper who says, I know the issues involved and I want to help and I'm willing to give somebody a job or a couple people a job. Please call me or email me. And so I sent him an email and we're going to talk this week. And then last night I went up and checked on the church line and I got a message yesterday from somebody who wants me to call him, says they're a businessman in the community and they saw the article. That lady saw the article. I had a call yesterday from a neighbor of mine who said, I'm 73 and the one guy you write about in the article was 73 and I'm really drawn to what can I do to help him? You see how God works? When you're among the broken, we have a talk back time. Hang on. When you're among the broken, God does all kinds of neat things because that's where we're supposed to be. We're not supposed to be huddling up with people that look just like us. And let me be clear. Let me be crystal clear. The broken are not projects. They're people because we're people and we're broken.